Time stopped the moment the old Realme 1 vibrated in my hand. Not the kind of freeze you feel when adrenaline spikes, but literal stillness. Every flickering light in the city froze mid-pulse, a bird in the distance hung mid-flap, and even the sound of my own heartbeat seemed muted. Only I moved, phone buzzing faintly in my palm as though alive. The screen showed no notification, only a shifting distortion like water ripples spreading across glass. For a moment, I thought my brain had short-circuited from exhaustion. I was an engineer, buried in blueprints and simulations more than sleep. But then the ripples widened, spilling light into the air above the phone. A hairline crack formed, not in the screen but in space itself. The air shimmered, edges glowing faint violet, like reality was glass under too much stress. I could see something moving on the other side. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Realme 1 was ancient by modern standards, barely worth repairing. I had been tinkering with it as a curiosity, nothing more than nostalgia for a device that marked my first years in engineering. Yet here it was, prying open something that should not exist. I reached toward the fissure, my fingers trembling. The air near it was colder than winter metal, sharp enough to sting my skin. Beyond, I glimpsed streaks of impossible colors, shapes that didn't obey perspective. My instruments, scattered across the lab, came alive. Magnetic sensors screamed, radiation meters spiked, and the quantum chronometer I'd left running to test local fluctuations went insane, counting hours forward, backward, and sideways in a loop. My mind ran through explanations. Faulty sensors. Hallucination. Some hidden projection or hack. But no, this was something real. It was space-time itself, bending, breaking, revealing. The phone had become a key. I whispered to myself, "What did you unlock?" The lab door rattled as colleagues outside pounded and shouted. They must have seen the flash from the street. I ignored them, eyes fixed on the widening tear. It pulsed like a living wound in the fabric of reality. Then the silence broke. Not with sound, but with an overwhelming absence, like my ears were inverted. Out of that void, a vibration crawled into my bones, forming patterns. It wasn't human language, not even noise. It was structure. A signal. The phone's speaker crackled, screen brightening. Lines of symbols scrolled, geometries, repeating fractals, almost biological in rhythm. I recorded every detail with trembling fingers. This wasn't random static. Someone, something was trying to communicate. For a breath, awe swallowed fear. If this was contact, it was more than every telescope, every radio dish, every starship had managed in centuries of searching. Humanity's dream, nightmare, and obsession. First contact. And it came through a discarded piece of tech no one valued anymore. I couldn't help but laugh. A nervous, breathless laugh at the absurdity. Aliens reaching us, not through satellites or probes, but through a budget phone from a forgotten decade. Yet as the patterns became sharper, as the vibrations settled into rhythms close to speech, my skin prickled. Whoever was on the other side wasn't just reaching, they were watching. The crack widened with each pulse, edges trembling like thin ice under too much weight. The world outside the lab was still frozen, colleagues caught mid-knock, traffic lights burning without flicker, raindrops hanging mid-air like glass bead. Reality wasn't stable anymore. I was alone in a bubble of fractured time. The message intensified, the Realme 1 buzzing so hard it burned my hand. And then, amid the incomprehensible geometries, I heard it. A word. Not in English, but something my brain interpreted anyway. Observe. Every hair on my body stood upright. This wasn't random noise. Whoever or whatever lived beyond the crack had locked eyes on humanity. They weren't greeting. They weren't welcoming. They were studying. I staggered back, trying to steady my breath. My reflection in the lab's steel wall warped, like a dozen versions of me looking back, some older, some younger, some different. The phone pulsed once more, showing a diagram of Earth, a glowing dot where I stood, highlighted like prey under a hunter's scope. Observed, the voice echoed again, deeper this time, vibrating inside my skull. The word carried weight. judgment. I wanted to smash the device, hurl it into the crack and seal it shut. But the engineer in me refused. Curiosity outweighed terror. If humanity was being judged, then someone had to understand why. Someone had to prove we weren't a species to be dismissed or eradicated. I leaned closer to the rift, ignoring the stinging cold. The shapes beyond were sharper now, structures vast as continents, lights arranged in deliberate patterns, moving like fleets. Shadows shifted, enormous silhouettes eclipsing impossible horizons. Civilizations older than stars themselves, peering through a tear opened by accident, and finding us. For a moment I forgot fear and whispered, "You're real." The Realme one buzzed again. My breath fogged in the frozen air. Another word formed, heavy with finality, evaluating. And then the crack widened just enough for me to see an eye. Not organic, not mechanical, but something vast, like an ocean condensed into a single gaze. It blinked, or maybe the universe blinked, and I knew with certainty that humanity's secrets were no longer our own. I clutched the phone tighter. My pulse steadied. If we were being evaluated, then we would be ready. Because if history had ever taught us anything, it was this. Humanity never bowed to eyes in the dark. We stared back. The crack pulsed brighter, spreading hairline fractures of light across the frozen lab. My heart raced, but my hands moved with purpose, recording, analyzing, decoding. The Realme one buzzed like a living thing, translating impossible vibrations into shapes, symbols, and fragments of meaning. The word evaluating still echoed inside my bones when the geometry on the screen shifted. What began as random fractals suddenly snapped into patterns. They were trying to speak. The first translation was simple, almost dismissive. Primitive. A flush of anger cut through my fear. Primitive? They saw Earth, saw humanity, and judged us as something beneath consideration. Yet the very fact they used our crude device to reach across dimensions betrayed something else: curiosity. They underestimated us, and I wasn't going to let that stand. I pulled up the phone's rudimentary encryption tools, feeding the alien signal into old code I had once written for fun, puzzles designed to break patterns. To my astonishment, the geometry collapsed into cleaner data. For the first time, the voice in my head sharpened into clarity. Dangerous. It wasn't meant as a warning to me, it was a classification, a label. They thought we were both primitive and dangerous. A contradiction, but one they seemed to take seriously. The crack widened with a low groan, like the universe grinding its teeth. For the first time, I caught a full glimpse of the other side. Vast metallic arcs hung in a starless void, curved megastructures the size of continents orbiting something hidden in shadow. Fleets of vessels shimmered like insects caught in amber, their forms shifting too quickly for my eyes to track. I felt as though I were standing before gods who had turned their gaze casually upon ants. The Realme one vibrated again, this time harder, the screen flooding with alien glyphs at a speed that should have been unreadable. But as my mind processed them, clarity emerged. Coordinates, warnings, probability trees. They weren't just observing, they were calculating outcomes. The crack wasn't stable. If it widened too far, the rift could collapse spacetime in a chain reaction. Their solution was efficient, cold, and horrifying: erase the unstable node. Erase Earth. I clenched my fists, fury drowning out the chill of fear. Humanity had been many things throughout history: brutal, chaotic, reckless, but we had survived every trial. No alien tribunal had the right to decide our worth with the casual detachment of exterminators. I pressed the phone closer, speaking clearly though I wasn't sure they could hear words. You think we're primitive? You think we're a threat? You're right about one thing: we don't break easily. If you want to test us, then test us. The Realme one translated my defiance in a burst of distorted geometry, projected into the rift. For the first time, the other side responded not with cold judgment, but hesitation. The massive eye-shaped entity blinked, its surface rippling with something like thought. A new message appeared, slower this time, deliberate. You adapt. The words weren't praise. They were wary, almost suspicious. Humanity had just stepped out of the shadows, and already we had reshaped the conversation. I pushed further, feeding raw human history into the signal. Wars survived, disasters endured, impossible odds defied. Every pattern I could compress, every fragment of our stubborn will, I shoved into the stream. The phone grew hot, nearly searing my skin, but it held. On the other side, the fleets shifted, no longer poised in quiet menace but in something closer to recognition. The air around me vibrated with a chorus of alien voices layered together. For the first time, I felt emotion beneath the cold analysis. Not fear, calculation. They were reassessing us. Yet even as their perception shifted, a warning flared across the screen in blood-red script. The rift was expanding at an exponential rate. Their fleets were preparing to intervene, not with dialogue, but with force. They would rather scorch Earth clean than risk an uncontrolled collapse. I swallowed hard, my pulse steadying. They weren't wrong about the danger, but I wasn't about to let them decide our fate. Humanity had clawed its way through worse, and if this crack was to be our test, then we would pass it on our own terms. I tightened my grip on the Realme one. We're not primitives. We're not prey. You'll see soon enough. The phone responded with a single pulse, bright enough to blind. Across the crack, shadows stirred like storms, vast structures aligning into formation. They were coming through. The crack convulsed like a wound torn open too far, spilling light that bent reality around it. The stillness of the world fractured. Time staggered, skipping forward, then reversing, leaving me gasping as seconds rewound and repeated. Through the widening rift, shadows uncoiled, hard metallic forms sliding into our world. The fleets had chosen. They weren't waiting for negotiations. They were sending machines to contain or erase the instability, and Earth was the collateral. The first construct emerged, angular and fluid all at once, its surface shifting like liquid metal around a skeletal frame. It wasn't designed for beauty but efficiency, a drone meant to assess, dismantle, and destroy. 3 more followed, their movements synchronized, each radiating a hum that made my bones ache. This wasn't an invasion in the cinematic sense. It was sterilization, clinical and inevitable. Fear threatened to drown me, but defiance rose sharper. If they wanted sterilization, then they would have to bleed for it. Humanity had faced extinction before, meteors, plagues, wars, and always adapted. Against superior firepower, we had one advantage: unpredictability. I forced my mind into motion, rerouting the signals pouring through the Realme one. The ancient device, already glowing with impossible energy, became my interface. Every pulse of alien code was raw information: frequency, command structures, failsafe. They were arrogant enough to broadcast openly, never imagining that a human mind could decipher the smallest fragment. They had forgotten that curiosity was our most dangerous weapon. The drones scanned the lab, their gaze slicing through walls and machines as if material offered no resistance. One shifted toward me, its form reconfiguring into something like a weapon. My heart hammered, but instead of running, I mirrored its broadcast back into the rift, introducing noise, chaos, distortion. The Realme one screamed in protest, sparks dancing across its casing, but it held long enough. The drone staggered, movements jerking, its synchronization collapsing. That was the crack. Perfection required precision, and precision could be broken. Where they demanded flawless order, I gave them chaos. Humanity didn't fear disorder, we thrived in it. Our wars, our societies, our very evolution had been messy, unpredictable, volatile. That chaos was a weapon no alien logic could anticipate. The other drones adjusted instantly, tightening formation, but now I knew their rhythm. I flooded the rift with fractured signals, old Earth noise, compressed bursts of music, historical recordings, even fragments of human arguments I had saved for linguistic studies. The machines froze, struggling to reconcile a billion conflicting input. Through the rift, the fleets shifted, reacting. They had expected resistance, but not like this. Their entire empire, built on calculation, was meeting something it couldn't quantify. A species that didn't fear breaking rules. A species that had no pattern but survival. The room shuddered as the drones lashed out, releasing beams that sliced through steel like butter. I ducked, sparks raining, my ears ringing. One strike seared across my shoulder, pain blinding, but I clutched the Realme one tighter. I wouldn't let go. Not when the entire planet hung in the balance. Rage steadied me. With trembling fingers, I rerouted the noise, compressing humanity's story into a single blast. I poured into the signal every contradiction we embodied. Compassion and cruelty, science and superstition, victory and ruin. I gave them not perfection, but humanity raw and unfiltered. The drones convulsed, their forms destabilizing. One shattered midair, collapsing into shards that dissolved like smoke. Another crashed through the floor, unable to process the torrent. For every one that fell, more shapes pressed against the rift, clawing to enter. This wasn't a skirmish anymore. It was a test of endurance, and both sides knew it. I forced my shaking body upright, blood running down my arm. I wasn't a soldier, not trained for battles, but humanity's strength was never in individuals alone. As the crack widened further, I felt time shift, moments spilling forward into the frozen city beyond. The world outside was waking. Humanity would soon see what I had unleashed. And they would fight. That thought steadied me more than any weapon. Humanity was not a collection of fragile primitives waiting to be judged. We were the species that turned disasters into stepping stones, that carved civilizations from chaos, that survived even when survival seemed impossible. If the aliens thought sterilization was simple, they had just declared war on the most stubborn lifeform in the galaxy. The Realme one pulsed one last time, hotter than fire. Across the rift, the fleets hesitated. They had lost synchronization, their flawless order fraying under the weight of unpredictability. I had shown them a glimpse of what humanity was, and it terrified them. The crack screamed as spacetime tore wider, threatening collapse. Both of us stood on the edge of annihilation, alien empire and human defiance bound together in the same wound. For the first time, I felt their choice falter. Destroy us or acknowledge us. Exterminate chaos or learn from it. I stared back into that endless gaze and whispered through clenched teeth, "We're not prey. We're not weak. We are chaos. And chaos survives." The rift shuddered in response. The fleets stilled, and the world held its breath. The world trembled on the brink of collapse. The crack tore wider, its edges bleeding light that twisted space into spirals, every second stretching too long, then snapping back too fast. The alien fleets loomed beyond, their shadows stretched across infinity, waiting for the final moment to decide if Earth was to be spared or annihilated. My chest burned with each breath, shoulder raw from the searing strike, but I refused to let the Realme one slip from my grasp. It throbbed like a living heart, carrying not just my defiance but the weight of our entire species. The drones around me flickered, caught between function and failure, their logic unraveling under the storm of chaos I had unleashed. But the rift didn't care who won. If it collapsed uncontrolled, neither humanity nor the empire beyond would survive. For a single terrifying instant, predator and prey shared the same fate. That truth hung heavy in the air. The fleets hesitated. The eye beyond the rift, vast and unblinking, studied me not as an insect, but as an equal standing against oblivion. I pressed the phone to my chest, feeling its heat sear my skin. Its circuits were failing, battery swollen, screen spiderwebbed with cracks from power no human device should contain. Yet it still pulsed, waiting for command. I knew what it was asking: sacrifice. To stabilize the wound, it would have to burn itself out completely, collapsing the link it had forged. Humanity's accidental bridge to the stars would vanish with it. My hand shook, not from fear but from the enormity of choice. If I let go, if I failed, Earth would be reduced to a footnote in the Empire's calculations, one more unstable anomaly sterilized for the sake of order. If I acted, I could close the wound, but in doing so, I would prove to them that humanity was not reckless chaos without purpose. We were survivors who chose to endure, even when it cost us everything. The fleets began to move, aligning weapons that hummed with cosmic energy. They were seconds away from sealing the problem with fire. I raised the Realme 1 high, forcing the signal into one last transmission. Not defiance this time, but declaration. Images, histories, voices of our kind flowed through the device, not to confuse, not to overwhelm, but to show truth. Humanity at its most fragile and most unyielding. Our first fire. Our last wars. Our greatest dreams. Our endless refusal to bow to inevitability. The eye rippled with something I could not name. Not approval, not mercy, but recognition. They stopped. The fleets held their fire. The Realme 1 screamed in my hand, screen blinding white. I closed my eyes and poured every last fragment of will into it. Circuits popped, smoke filled the air, and heat scorched my palm, but the crack responded. The edges bent inward, light folding upon itself, the wound knitting shut with a roar like collapsing mountains. Space groaned, time shivered, and then, stillness. The world snapped back into motion. The city outside stirred. Raindrops fell again. Sound returned, sharp and alive. The drones crumbled into dust, their forms unable to exist without the rift. My knees buckled, and I collapsed to the floor, clutching the dead husk of the phone. Its once glowing screen was black, lifeless, nothing more than scorched plastic and glass. The device that had bridged humanity to the stars had burned itself into nothing. But we had survived. In the silence that followed, the message lingered in my mind, not words spoken but certainty delivered. We were no longer unseen. In their vast catalogue of species, we were not dismissed, not erased. We were noted, recorded, acknowledged. Not primitive. Not prey. Dangerous. Survivors. I laughed through ragged breaths, blood drying on my arm. The irony wasn't lost on me. An old relic of a phone, once discarded as obsolete, had carried humanity into its first true encounter with an empire spanning beyond comprehension. And through it we had forced them to respect us. Yet even as relief settled over me, the final pulse from the Realme 1 replayed in my mind. Not everything it sent had been meant for them. Some of it had been meant for me alone. Buried deep in its dying transmission was a final warning, a fragment too clear to be ignored. This is not the only crack. My heart stilled. That meant Earth was not a single anomaly, not a one-time accident. Somewhere, in other corners of space-time, more wounds were forming. More eyes would open. More fleets would come. I pushed myself upright, body aching but resolve sharp. Humanity had been observed. We had been evaluated. And though the rift was sealed, the test was only beginning. When the next crack opened, and it would, we would not cower. We would not beg. We would meet it with the same fire, the same chaos, the same unyielding defiance that had carried us through every trial. Because if there was one truth carved into our history, it was this: humanity does not survive by permission. We survive because we refuse not to. And when the stars themselves challenge us, our answer will always be the same. We stare back.